Your Excellencies, Ambassador of Turkey, Ambassador of Azerbaijan, Ambassador of Tunisia, Director of Palazzo of Warsaw, dear colleagues, professors of universities, dear students. It's a pleasure for me and honor to talk about Polish-Turkish history, which of course covers officially 700 years, but more than that, 800 years. Because today, Iran and Poland are only two who had a continuous presence in the world, within the world of Turkish Empire and Turkish Republic. All other former states who had a representation are disappeared. The other one whom we know, like France, England, Austria, and Russia, are younger diplomatic partners. So Poland has a tradition, and this tradition does not only cover the diplomatic history of the countries, more than that, the legendary facts, and to some extent, the literary heritage of these two countries. Our folklore and our pseudo-historiography is full of Polish fragments. It's a task of Turkish and Polish historiography to clean up sometimes this type of legendary facts, not legendary motifs from our scientific historiography. Certainly, 115 years ago, Cevdet Pasha, the famous historian of 19th century, and certainly the so-called last sunshine of the Turkish Medresas theological school, who represented a new world and new interpretation on the basis of classical heritage of Ottomans. He writes in his history for the Turkish and Polish history, the common fragment, the famous one. It's a fact that after the siege of Vienna and Karlowitz, Poland became a lonely kingdom in the eastern part of Europe. And after that, it was the task of Turkish Empire to be the ally of Poland against Russia and Austria. And actually, it is the history of 18th century. More than that, Cevdet tries to accuse the Polish state system, shame, and the assembly of the magnates guilty for the failures of the kingdom, not kingdom, Rzeczpospolita, because we only had two mighty empires. The one is a sea empire, Venezia, Respublica Serenissima, and the second one is the empire of the steppes, but also a republic, Rzeczpospolita. And these two empires, two republics actually, had their own system and organs. It's quite interesting for us, however, not well known. And it's quite logical, should be logical for us. However, we still don't understand the structure of this republic, which we had to do. The Polish Rzeczpospolita had a shame, where the magnates had to vote, have to vote actually, in total accordance, without any veto. That can be the fabulous of them maybe, but on the other hand, it was one of the first steps of representative democracy. In foreign world, we have no idea about Polish system of votes. The one is, of course, when the time arrived for a new king or a dux in Venezia, they gathered together, and I think a few thousands. They have voted for their representatives. These are basically, of course, mighty and influential pawns of the republic, and then they came together in the famous Sejm. And among the first voters, we also have, quite interesting, the Tatar nobility of ex-Crimean. These are people who had, after internal conflict and war with the Khans of Crimea and with other Mirzas, and left the country and took their asylum in Polish Litva, in Lithuanian Grand Duchy. That means in the world of Rzeczpospolita or Wielkopolska. And among them we have certainly many families, dynasties, who stayed here and he ruled together. This is the first original site of this Catholic country, to have among his elite the Tartarian nobles of Muslim origin, and to give them their own privilege. That's a part of Ottoman history and Crimean Khanate. So a Khanate who not only stayed in our history, common history, as the rival of the Rzeczpospolita, but first of all, sometimes an internal partner of the Republic. It's also a fact that some of the minorities of this country are the real founders of Turkological researches. This is the only exception on this area. Everywhere we can talk about prejudice against Turkish existence and against the flow of the Turkish historiography. Only in Poland we can talk about a friendly, but more than scientifically very calm historiography, which has been built absolutely not only by the Catholic Polaks, but by Karaims of Turkic origin and by Tartarian origin as well. I will be ready, if you ask, to give their names. But let me mention here the memory of Abrahamovich, Zajanczkowski, and Tubinsky, the contemporary Hojas, masters of our generation on this field. Polish history starts, first of all, with industrialists, manufacturers, and business people, the merchants in our area. The one who would maybe visit today on the mid of central Anatolia in Turkey, the so-called Karakalla baths, the Roman baths, you will meet there a cemetery. In this cemetery, you can see the tombstones of British men, certainly French and Italian merchants, but among them the Polish one. The Polish mercanti have started their early career not only in Anatolia, first of all, of course, in Bursa. So the Turks were able to know and to get the products of this country, and as well as the Poles, the products of our country. That was a time where people joined the exchange of textile, the exchange of metalwork, and the exchange of even other arts factories. Now we come to the point of the war. The war between Poland and Turkey is another subject. For the subject we have for that, we have to consider the three periods of that. The one has already started with the existence of Polish presence on Balkans, and that was the time of the Jagiellonians. The Jagiellonians have reached to the coast, the shores of Black Sea. So they are the neighbors of Turkish Empire, first time in the history. But unfortunately, this neighborhood could not exist so much. First of all, there was not an active commercial way to bring them to survival. But anyway, the Polish armies was a combination of Lithuanian, Bohemian, and Hungarian one. And this is the first page of the Ottoman history. The first page is the so-called Srpsandö, today on the banks of the Serbian country. Hacı İlber, the first commander of the Ottomans against Poland, had the siege. But very short after, as we know, Hunyadi János and the combined army of Hungary and Poland had the victory, who were able to push the newly burned, the newly emerged Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire, towards the end of the Balkans. It's only the war between Ladislas and Sultan Murat, 1444. Varna, Bitva pod Varna, is a very, very hot subject in the history of Poland and Turks. Still today, people talk about it. Maybe no doubt if the Poles talk about their wars on the Balkan, because the Polacks belong to the historiographic nations of this world. But we Turk, we make history, but we don't like to write and talk about it. Despite this fact, the Polish factor is quite hot subject in our historiography and in popular mind. Certainly, the last of the first period, Varna, was a very important factor for Polish history. And after that, the Polish Republic stopped the activities in Orient. And then came, of course, the expansion of the Ottomans. The first period of expansion is the Mehmet the Conqueror, and the second period is certainly Suleiman the Magnific. Suleiman the Magnific, at the very beginning of his career of 45 years, first conquered Beograd, which was a stronghold of Apostolic Hungarian Kingdom, and then, of course, after 5 years, the Battle of Mohacs, and so that Hungary, separately from Poland, had its twilight. There were no more a Hungarian kingdom after 1526, where on the other hand, Poland still had his conflict with New Muscovite Empire and still its conflict with Habsburgs. This conflict was a coward one. Poland always looked after for the alliance of France and sometimes for the alliance of the Turks. And Poland, on the other hand, had to take care for the Crimean Khanate. Today, we have a very interesting subject, the relations of Crimean Khanate and Polish Republic. One of the first ambassadors to Crimean Khanate, Martin Bronewski, compiled a wonderful travel book and so-called report of his ambassadorial days, Sefaretname. This title is called Tartariye Description, translated even into Turkish, one of the rare books, where he gives a very intellectual description of the northern Black Sea and the political and social structure of a Muslim Khanate, the rest of the legendary Golden Order. And after that, we easily can understand what kind of meaning had Poland for the Turks. Poland had the Cossacks under his supremacy, and these Cossacks had been used, even misused, by the Muscovite Grand Duchy, Tsardom. And on the other hand, they had been used sometimes against Turkish Empire, but most of them, Poland had to survive under these circumstances. It's a fact there was a very original civilization and culture just on the mid of the steppes. These steppes is sometimes called, if I'm not wrong and pronounce this rightly, it was Rzeczpospolita Lager Zapadniego Kultura, against barbarians, they said. But these barbarians covered both Christians and Muslims. The Muslims had been, of course, the Turks, and the Christian part was the Muscovite Empire, the new one. Poland had to exist against these forces, but after a while, the traumatic changes brought another alliance, Poland and Turkish Empire against Muscovite Union and against Habsburgs. When could they be happened? 17th century, Belagerung, the second siege of Vienna by the Turks. There we had a very interesting historical turn point. The point is that Mustafa Pasha, the member of the famous Kara Mustafa Pasha, famous Köprülü dynasty of Grand Viziers. He was a very able statesman. He could rule Istanbul wonderfully. At the absence of Grand Vizier. Who was this Grand Vizier? His brother-in-law, the son of the Grand Köprülü Mehmet Pasha. Köprülü Fazıl Ahmet Pasha, an interesting figure of 17th century. This historical portrait needs a small description. That first, he was a well-studied scholar, the son of Köprülü Mehmet Pasha, a Yeniçer, illiterate but extremely intelligent, and who could restore the empire of 17th century against the revolts of the Yanichers and against the chaos of Anatolian peasants, could restitute the empire, bring the peace and order, and certainly under a dictatorship. So the way towards West was open. He died. The son of this illiterate, intelligent vizier was another grand vizier who became Köprülü Fazıl Ahmet Pasha. Ahmet Pasha, unlike his father, was a well-known scholar of his age. He was brilliantly intelligent, very calm man, and interesting discrepancy for a member of the ulema class, now no more from ulema, the Grand Vizier. He was not an alcoholic, but he liked to take his beverages every night. He died at 41, and in this very short life, within this short lifetime, he was able to bring to the empire the famous Treaty of Khotin and annex Kamanicha for a while. Kamanicha, the Polish territory, that annexation was a white elephant for Turkish Empire, because in order to hold it, you had to spend immense money, and it was very difficult to hold this province just on the mid of the steppes of Ukraine, and it was very open, you had to lose it. So there is a new hero in the history of Poland. This is Jan Sobieski. He was able to restore part of his kingdom, part of the republic, before the second siege of Vienna. It's a fact, as Cevdet Pasha says, the second siege of Vienna was an inevitable change for Jan Sobieski and Republic. The Arabs have a wonderful word for that, Qader al-Muhabba, the beloved destiny. This destiny brings you sometimes to a later catastrophe, but you have to live it and you have to taste it. The siege of Vienna and the victory of Jan Sobieski was an inevitable destiny, a beloved destiny for Poland. The victorious king brought Poland a kind of faiblesse because of the restructuration of Austria. That means Holy Roman German Empire. It's certainly a fact, after the siege of Vienna during 18th century, Austria, especially this part of the German Empire, became an expansionist on the, by territories, first of all, by commercial activities and building of the manufacture and industry. And in this empire, finally, we have the last moment, the first, second, and third partition of the Polish Republic. Cracovia, the old center of this wonderful republic, became part of Austria, German Empire, and then Austrian Grand Duchy. And this time we see these Polacks as diplomats, as generals and merchants at every corner of the Turkish Empire. And it's a fact that Polish culture had a kind of renaissance during these ages. The dark age of the Republic brought give a new kind of impetus to the people. And I'm sure the zenith point of that was the revolt of 1830, the internal war, and after that, of course, the common and joint venture of Hungarians, Poles, and Italians against Austria and Russia. In 1849, the Poles, together with Hungarians, took their asylum in the empire of the sultans. Before that, in 1831, the Polish Committee of Liberation took their asylum in Istanbul too. And the first example of Turkish history. This committee had been recognized by Ottoman court as a kind of diplomatic mission. That's very important. A similar one has been applied at the beginning of 20th century for Zionist committee and Levant Bank of the Zionist committee in Istanbul. Certainly, it was a repetition of the last days of the Rzeczpospolita, when this notorious event had been heard in Ottoman Palace. The ambassador Franciszek Potocki was there waiting for his lettre de croyance. Whenever they heard it, they didn't hesitate, suddenly gave the audience to Franciszek Potocki. He organized and applied the whole delegation, a few hundred people, gave the lettre de credence to Sultan, became the title of ambassador to Sublime Porte, but of course, as soon as possible, he had to leave Istanbul and return to Cracovia. That was this event. And after that, the protocol had been repeated in Ottoman court. The ambassador of Poland, still on the way, that they had been kept till the beginning of Tanzimat era. The protocol, the sign, has died out with the change of the palace. In Dolmabahce, we don't have any proof of that type. Certainly, the Polish artisans like Glebowski, painters, the musicians, all had been in Istanbul, and the Saint Antoine mission today in Istanbul, of course, had its footprints in the history of our country and our capital, Istanbul. The War of 1768, it was a war against Catherine II, ended in 1774 with the loss of Crimean Khanate. And certainly that was the beginning of Dark Ages. It was also the end of the alliance, which had started in 1711 by the first alliance against Russia. Charles XII was there, and Stanislas Poniatowski was there. It was the war, and it was the time of the Polish presence in this country. Certainly, it was the time of the alliance between Sweden and Turkey. We cannot forget that during the handling of the Treaty of Karlowitz, the whole Christian, under the leadership of Innocence XI on one side, and the whole of the world, the other part of the world, was on the side. Then other part of the world consisted only Ottoman Empire and Swedish kingdom. Even Iranian shahs had their representatives among the members of the Holy Liga. They supported the Holy Alliance in Karlovitz against the demands of Turkey. We had, a history. For that, it's very important. We had a Wojciech Krzyżanowski, the general who had been naturalized in England, became the first Rat, the first Müşavir, counselor of the newly founding Ottoman army. And for that, Königsmark ambassador, legat of Prussian kingdom, the Russian ambassador said, maybe we can understand that an English general can help and counsel the Ottoman army, but not a naturalized Polish general. That shows us the deep conflict between the potential Poland and Russia, and on the other hand, the coward alliance had on the way. A history started in 1364 with war, ended now in a very strange and sweet alliance. Years after the fall of empires, there was this famous legend: the Polish Rzeczpospolita will take back its independence whenever the Turkish horses will drink the water of the Vistula. That had been realized because during the war in Galicia, Western Galicia, the Ottoman division had the horses and cavalry, and they, of course, took their rest on the shores of Vistula with their horses. So it's a kind of realization of the Polish legend among the Turkish soldiers. And it was a new period. We had Poles again in the Republic. And it was also another tragic history. We had a wonderful man, the last one. I only remember him as a figure because as I was a schoolboy, I was not able to understand his quality. But my parents, my mother, as the member of this Russian Studies Center, Philology at the University of Ankara, had Ambassador Sakhanitsky as colleague. Sakhanitsky suddenly, over 13 days of heroic defense of Poland, lost all his capacity to go back to his country. He and his wife, La Contessa, stayed in Istanbul. İsmet Pasha was generous enough to give him a salary, and he stayed there. After 5 years of period, he had the hopes to return to Poland. No, impossible. This time the Red Army and the new order. So he stayed there. The friendship he joined there, he tasted there, he enjoyed there. And the tragedy of an old couple who always lived with a nostalgia back for their country is in my mind. A refined man who was a real expert of Russian history, of political things, political history, and certainly a figure of the high society in Ankara, beloved by diplomats and soldiers and westernized intellectuals. Among them, a very interesting figure in Turkish press, Madame Nimet Arzık, The mother was, I mean, from bourgeois class of Cracovia and Varsovia, and the father a young Turk, a very famous diplomat and soldier of the last Ottoman period. Poland was for us the beautiful garden in Ankara, the beautiful house of a Polish pan in this form. And Poland was for us Sienkiewicz and Raymond. These two novels are translated very early into Turkish by some engineers and economists who have studied in Poland and married to Polish ladies, of course. I am very thankful to all of you that you gave me, submitted me, that you granted me this wonderful night and evening here in Warsaw. And I think, I don't know your program, I'm ready to take some questions and thank you for your patience.
I would like to ask you why Turkey has not recognized the partitions, even though it could have had grievance to the Poles, that the Poles, however, are at Vienna with the help of Sobieski, defeated Turkish army. Why still Turkey sympathized with Poland, had such good feelings towards Poland despite all these grievances possible? Thank you very much.
Well, in empires we have different memories. It also belongs to the siege of Varna, where there is no reason, I mean, to have any kind of antipathy towards the Turks, because they defended their empire in Varna, and it was certainly a very tragic final for the Polish king Ladislaus and for Cardinal Cesarini, certainly an outstanding intellectual of his age, together with Bessarion in Florence, in the Council of Florence. There is also no reason to hate the Poles, I mean, for the siege of Jan Sobieski in Vienna. I'm sure many of you had been able to visit Vienna. Kahlenberg is a castle upon the hills, and it's very close to the city center. You can take a walk, that's all. And Marshal Merzifonlu Kara Mustafa Pasha was a very feeble marshal, a good statesman, but not an able marshal. He was not the man to rule and to command and grand army of the Turks. First, he had to conquer and occupy this castle. So if you gave the opportunity to Polish division, then you can be suffer, of course. That's no doubt about it. And as some of the historians do, we cannot accuse Sobieski with his victory to prepare the very future, very coming catastrophe of Polish history. And Austria and Russia and Germany started to take their opportunity, their chance, day by day after the second siege of Vienna. And Kaiser Leopold did not respect him at all after the siege. Everything had been wrought on his side, and he became the hero of the war. Actually, he wasn't there. I mean, he left Vienna for Wiener Neustadt to the further part of his country, in Niederösterreich, Lower Austria. The only one, I mean, who stayed there are the students, some of the clergy and Archbishop of Vienna, and the Poles, King Sobieski on Kallenberg. But who would like to remember it? You have to solve it, erase it, this memory, from the mind of the masses. That's the propaganda and the policy. And after a century of Wiener Belagerung, the siege of Vienna, the Respublika would disappear in the history of the Eastern Europe. That's a fact. So that's a fact. I don't understand why people try to remember it. The Polish history is full of victories. Not only the siege of Vienna, but many. But this one is absolutely deeply and very, very concentrated point of the common mind, common memory. That's a fact. Do we have any other ones? Buyurun.
First of all, I would love to thank you to give us that opportunity to listen to you, especially abroad of Turkey. My question would be about language, actually. And there is a phrase in Polish, like siadać po turecku, like sitting like Turkish. Due to the it's like sitting like Turkish.
Türk'ün zit.
Yes, like bağdaş kurmak.
Well, I mean, if you don't have a chair, you sit on that way.
Yes, but
the whole Oriental sit on that way. All of the Orientals sit on the way. Any kind of, I mean, Oriental man or gentleman or a peasant, it's very common for us. Türk'ün zits. Today we can't do that. For example, myself and all my friends and students are not able to sit on that way because they lost it. My father had a very anatomical structure, special one. I mean, he had not the last bone of his neck because he was born on the horse. That's something like that. He said to doctor, why are you so shocked? I mean, I don't remember the first day of my riding in my life. But today, I mean, our prime minister, ministress, said, I mean, beyaz at, white horse. Wrong, of course, it's kurat. They even can't use the vocabulary about the horse. The Russian teacher in Vienna says, loshat, the Russian loshat, comes from Turkish word alasha. And all the Turkish students looked up and thought, what's that? So they have no idea about the vocabulary of the Turks in horse riding. That's something like our Türk'ün zits belongs to everyone, to the Arabs, Persians, of course the Baburids and Indians. But they call it so Türk'ün zits because they try to sit here on the chair. That's very typical. To sit on the chair helps you for your own dining. Those who have the Türk'ün zits, they eat faster. The Turks don't like long dinners, you know that. Their conversation covers only coffee and smoking after meal. And these are facts we have to know in our life. But on the other hand, this type of Türk'ün zits helped the Turks and other Orientals to use another type of closet. and that helps a lot to the circulation of the blood and etc. That's other this. And I think the history of toilet and dining is as important as the war material. So a new page for our history. Yeah, please. The lady.
I suppose I can hold it without the microphone, but...
Yeah, but maybe. For translation, I think, yeah.
A few years ago, I heard a wonderful story from a Polish ambassador in Ankara. He told me that in 1939, Germans, Nazis, asked the Turkish government, I suppose it was İsmet İnönü.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
The president was Inönü, right?
To give them our embassy building. But they said no, they didn't agree. And I want to ask you if you know maybe why they say they didn't agree to give that building to Nazis. I heard, that there is still a letter in Turkish archives written by İsmet İnönü, where he wrote that our friendships, Polish and Turkish friendships, it's longer than, I'm not sure how to say that.
The German occupation,
yeah.
In Eastern Europe. Yeah. The fact is, the ambassador, as I told you, Sakhanitsky, took the asylum and all the rights. And the Nazis first, not Nazis, Germans, not only Nazis, I'm not a diplomat, sorry. So I don't use this hypocritic vocabulary. These are Germans. If they think today on other way, welcome. But for a day, it was whole German right. Those who were not agree with it, as one of my Jewish friends said, well, all the Sudetenreich, Sudetendeutschen waren mit denen, they had been together. Those who hadn't been agree with Nazis and with all other Germans of Sudetenland, them we saluted in Dachau, he said. They had been also in the concentration camp. This is a part of history. The Germans asked for, of course, for the occupied embassies, Austrian embassy, first of all. They took it. I think it became the Handelsabteilung, commercial department of the embassy. And then the Czechish embassy is a wonderful Bauhaus architectural style. There, von Papen had its residence as ambassadorial residence, despite the fact they have a very large garden, but it was just, pretension, we have our empire even in Ankara. And then I think after a while, they tried for Polish embassy, but I don't know who had been there after a while, not at the beginning. So because not a treaty between Poland and Germany after the occupation, as you know, but the times arrived and there was no more Poland. None of them, the other states recognized the occupation of Poland by Germans. They had a government in London, unlike others, many others, but it is the destiny. And certainly after the war, they had returned. The National Bank, the reserves of the National Bank of Serbia and Croatia had been taken to Ankara. And Turkish government kept them and gave back to Tito, Marshal Tito. So that was the beginning of a very good period, because only the reserves and all the values had been kept in the cash of the central Turkish central bank. They returned it, but to Marshal Tito, of course. So, and that was a good period, and so on. The Polish occupation, of course, the history of the foreign history of Turkey is not right. Many people easily accuse Turkey being the allies of the Germany, which is not right, of course. And many people say that Secretary General of Foreign Office is a pro-German. It is not right. The man, Ambassador Numan Menemencoğlu, had not a good right reason to be the partner of the German Reich, because that was a francophone, francophile, and Anglophile and Anglophone. He hated Germans, I mean, deep inside. But it was the policy. I mean, everyone had a role. I mean, you have to act on this part, and you have to act on this part. The only partisans of Germans during this period are, unfortunately, the pens of the Turkish press. Some of them had been really Germanophiles, and some of them Anglophiles, that's all. But not the government itself. There is no reason for us, because İsmet İnönü hated lifetime the Germans. During First World War, he was very anti-German, together with Mustafa Kemal, later Atatürk, and Kazım Karabekir Pasha, and a group of officers. And we had only our commercial activities with Germans and with British as well, with Americans as well. It's only Stalinist Russia who urged Turkey to take a part on their side, which we couldn't, of course. And the Republic was enough reasonable to return the demands of the Germans. As you know, the Germans tried to give the Italian Dodecanezza to Republic before they left. They didn't take it. They didn't take it, and it's good because they scared of being partner of Nazi Germans, and that was quite dangerous for Turkey if you have the Russians nearby. There you have to be very careful, of course. Please, buyurun.
İyi akşamlar. Mehmet Ali Özçobanlar, Universitet Warszawski, Faculty of Management, Organizational History. I would like to ask, first of all, the question is regarding the more closer historical relation between Poland and Turkey. That I had a speech and research about Polish and Turkish relationship in the Second World War, about the Polish intellectual people who lived in Turkey. And regarding those people, some of those people they established in Etimeskut aircraft factory during the Second World War. So they stayed in Turkey for around 5 years. And could you say actually this was a support, although we know that Turkey was not literally included in Second World War, that was a support for the alliance of Second World War participant? And the second question will be more contemporary. One of your interview with Bulgarian king, the last Bulgarian king in Hurriyet newspaper, who actually ate the first banana in his life in Turkey.
And that was a Turkish banana.
Yeah.
Today we don't have this privilege anymore.
Yes.
The South American banana, which I don't prefer so much.
In your interview, actually, that's the Bulgarian king came back to Bulgaria after 5th or 6th decades and start in a democratic way, and he became a prime minister in Bulgaria. So, do you think in Turkey we may have some of this in the past? The royal family members may have a place in Turkish democratical area nowadays. Do you think so?
Nowadays, well, they can have, and they try. And I think the government party was quite sympathetic with them. They had good relations, but I don't think many of them are able to join any kind of activity, especially the political one. Like everything, the good old days and the good old men have been passed away. Former crown prince or the head of the dynasty, Osman Ertuğrul Efendi, was a wonderful man. I mean, his knowledge in music, his German in Teresianum, which he picked up there in Vienna, and his French, his ability, he died. So we don't have any of them. The second one is, I know, is the Princess Neslişah Sultan. I mean, a glossaire, a polyglot, starting with Arabic, Provençal French, English, and etc. And a very good friend of Otto von Habsburg. Quite interesting, huh? These two dynasties, I mean, who fought like cats and dogs, I mean, their children, the last crown prince and the last princess of the dynasty, official princess, official registered, became good friends. This is something else, of course. Of course, they can come back. They don't need any legal assistance. The laws have been passed, they can come, they can vote, and they can be elected. But I don't know whether they have, I mean, able members for that. If they can, welcome. They are citizens anymore. If you have, yeah, please.
Hocam, tekrardan hoş geldiniz. I've been thinking the whole day whether I should ask this question or not, but it will be related to Armenian genocide. So as you know, Poland is one of the countries which has recognized the so-called Armenian genocide, but there are some, although there are some historical facts, just to remind to everybody shortly that in the 1848, when the Hungarians and Poles started a revolt against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so many politicians and generals and army officers took asylum in the Ottoman Empire, if I'm not mistaken. And one of them was Severin Blinski, and his son was Alfred Blinski, and later on became Ahmet Rüstem Efendi. And exactly, and then he was the first ambassador of Ottoman Empire in 1912 or 1913 in United States, Washington, who stood
Alfred Rüstem, yes.
Yes,
yeah,
and who stood stridently against the so-called Armenian genocide and against the publications of the U.S. newspapers. So, according to all these historical facts, and I would like to ask your opinion, and would you...
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, well, certainly there is a period of Polish-Turkish history. I didn't want to talk about it so much because our ambassador brilliantly gave a name. I mean, Count Konstantin Borzhenski, grandfather of Nazım Hikmet. There is also Kosielski, Sefer Pasha, and there is a Tchaikovsky, Sadık Rıfat Pasha, who really built a wonderful battalion of Christians and Muslims, a mixed banderole, I mean, with cross and half moon during Crimean War, and he laid it a lot to Russian army. You know, maybe from the music life, I mean, There are strong five Russian nationalist musicians, Mussorgsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Milinka, etc. Tchaikovsky, the Russian Tchaikovsky, the famous one, we named them as, well, these are the musicians for the kucher, for the wagon riders, for proletariat. This is not a serious and valuable music. And they said, look at this Tchaikovsky. This is our Tchaikovsky. Baş belası yani. Something like, they hated him really, Tchaikovsky. Pyotr Tchaikovsky was hated by them under this name, because the Polish Tchaikovsky is, of course, a real enemy of the Russian Empire. Our life has been changed. In Istanbul and in other cities, we suddenly took a new elite where they have male-female soirees together, dancing, etc. The balls were still not officially organized, but Istanbul enjoyed a new life. We had, wonderful painters and paintresses who used new models. Can you imagine that? The women. Mihri, for example, she was from Abkhazia. But anyway, we had a new life. That's something else. Turkey was a land of asylum, no doubt about it. Armenian question is a question. It's not a sweet one. That was the joint massacre of the peoples. The Armenians massacred some of the Muslims, and Muslims massacred the Armenians, and there was an organization. This organization is led by the German staff. At the head of them, Bronsart von Schleffendorf, general. That was the general staff chief of Enver Pasha. It's a fact. We are able to discuss it. We have to discuss it together with Armenians. But what I don't understand is, to decide for this very complicated historical point, historiographical problem, the parliaments. Certainly any parliament on this world, and especially shame, the heroic institution of this history, is well respected for us. You have to be proud with them at every stage of Polish history. Their decisions should be holy, like sacramental one. But to that finally, that's a kind of parliament. The parliaments should not be able to lead the historiographical points. That's another fact. Every corner of our palace is full of legends about Turco-Polish history. We had been really hurt after that, and we didn't understand it. That's the only thing I have to say. The respectable chairman of Polish Shame had been by us for a visit, and he said, well, we have to be, an arbiter between Armenians and Turks to bring that to a point. I said, you can't be, because you are one of the parts, because of this decision. So I can't understand it, and I don't know why it's necessary to do it. Poland is too far from Armenia and from Turkey to some extent. Well, there are here wonderful cemetery in Lvov, former part of Polish Republic. There in this cemetery you can have some Kypchak Armenian tombstones, but Kypchak Armenian tombstones, not from Armenian race, Turkish one. And you even can find some articles about it in La Revue du Monde Arménien. It's a part of the actuality. That's difficult to understand. It's difficult to understand. I'm not an expert of Polish Catholicism. I respected it. Because outside of the church there was communism for a while, Stalinism. But within the church there always had been a Poland. This Poland has to keep its own Polish character. That's what I say. But I'm not a Polak. This is just a friend of Poland, from my early times. And the Turks are actually, they have nothing against Poland, as you know. And it was hard for us to understand this type of demonstration. That's a demonstration. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor, thank you again for coming here and visiting us. I would like to, it's not actually a question, but I would like to hear your comment about recent events, because people who were living here long enough to feel the differences that Polish people had, the view of Polish people against the Turks, due to the fact that current events, for example, refugee crisis, had some effects on people with the media, etc. Well, do you find it concerning as we find it as concerning? There was a sympathy before, a few years back, towards Turks, but it's disappeared lately. I suspect it's due to the fact that refugee crisis arose and the media was constantly focusing on that, and the fact that we have the same religion as those people, as those Syrian people coming to Europe. How do you comment on that?
Well, certainly people don't like these large amounts of migrants and migrations to their own country, because everyone has, a kind of hesitation and a kind of anxiety, losing his job, etc. That's understandable. But I'm not the one, who would reject the Syrian part. I know this country a little bit. Syrians have a wonderful elite in Middle East. And a good part of them are good artisans. However, they also have beggars and bandits, etc. And good agronomes, agriculturists. So they can be assimilated. There is no reason to reject these people forever, which I don't find very right. It's very fact, it's my idea. To talk about anti-Turkism in this country is for me not easy to understand, because even during Second World War, the darkest age of the Poland, there were lots of migrants from Soviet Union, Tatars and other Turkic peoples. I asked them personally during my lifetime, because I'm a man born in 47, what kind of days you had. Of course, very difficult days. It was war, but we had no rejection and no anti-Turk, anti-Muslim feelings among the Polish people. That's what they said, the immigrants of those days. There are many, Here they had, even a Turkic community starting on the Bazar Rinke, up, climbing to the level of academicians, etc. I can give you some names even. So that was their joint and common opinion. If there is a kind of anti-Turkism today, which I don't, we will know very well, of course, it's a pity. It's a pity. Because we have another image for this country. Hopefully it will pass. It will pass. The days are very difficult for everyone, and everyone looks for that. But if this anti-Turkism comes by German propaganda, covered or uncovered, it's really something to discuss. Because I know the Germans have a very serious anti-propaganda for Turks of different reasons. We are aware of that as scholars. There are some new dissertations in Germany who have nothing to do with serious tradition of scholarly tradition of this country. We can give you some names, who create, who write fakes, and in German, which is called Dichten, They dichted, that's a Dichtung, that's a fake historiography, and those have nothing to do basically with the quality of former classical German Orientalists and historians and scholars. And there is a really subversive attack, towards some points of Turkey and Turkish history. For example, he gives a book, Ehrenmord in der Türkei. Ehrenmord is, as you heard about it, this so-called honor mords, etc. They don't give any geographical definition nor a timetable of that type of cases. That's a sociological monography, soi-disant, so-called one. Or any kind of, propaganda brochure under the title of a scholarly work. The one talks about gas chambers in Trabzon, I beg your pardon, Trabzon, one of the underdeveloped regions of Turkish Empire on the Black Sea coast, and during First World War. During First World War, gas chambers. That's, she's crazy, the one who talks about it, what's a gas chamber and what has to do, with Turkish industry or chemistry of the First World War years. This type of propaganda affairs have been certainly financed not by scholarly institutions, but some others. It's clear that I would like to say here and leave it to your own understanding and your own search. Thank you.